True believer in budtender education. That's always foundational. I think if you've seen any of my posts on LinkedIn, almost all of them touch on budtender education and how owning that point of conversion, that path to purchase is critical. I love that in this industry, unlike any other industry, two things that are very unique about cannabis is that the brick and mortar is the final mile for cannabis. And the second, also unique to cannabis, is that a consumer can be 100% predisposed to buying a certain product and walk out with something completely different.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to High Touch, the podcast where we explore how cannabis brands are creating real, meaningful experiences in the wild. I'm Jake.
And I'm Duffy. We're two founders figuring this out in real time and talking to the people who are actually building the future of cannabis from the inside.
So today we're talking to someone who's been behind some of the most recognizable and high-performing cannabis brands in California, Angela Pih. If you've smoked it, vaped it, or seen it on a shelf in the past 5 years, there's probably a good chance that Angela helped build the brand behind it. Angela Pih is a powerhouse brand strategist and marketing leader who's helped shape the voices of brands like Papa Barkley, CannaCraft, StateHouse Holdings, and most recently CCell. Before that, she led marketing in fashion, wellness, and tech. So she's bringing a deep cross-industry lens to cannabis that's all about storytelling, design, and trust.
He has launched 70 plus products, built national campaigns, unified brand portfolios, and still makes time to mentor, judge the Emerald Cup, and sit on boards like Lucid Green, Rolling Stones Culture Council. So yeah, Angela's everywhere. She's seen it all. And welcome to High Touch. We're so stoked to have you on.
Oh, so excited to be here. It just, as a marketer within the cannabis industry, our understanding and an adoption of technology and how we're interacting with consumers along the entire path to purchase is so important. So always looking at what can we bring on, how can we calibrate? And I think one of the truths that a lot of brands don't really think about is that dispensaries are not going to sell your brands and your products for you. You got to do it yourself.
100%.
I love that.
So jumping right into it, having worked across so many brands and stepped into so many roles and kind of seen so many of the inner workings of how these businesses are operating across the US, when you first jump into one of these new roles, curious to hear, what do you first look at to try to understand the soul of the brand and that brand promise? What's your kind of, day one, week one audit look like?
I think jumping into day one really with a different type of perspective, right? So I have 2 decades of global agency experience across CPG brands, your Procter and Gamble's, luxury real estate, hospitality, and luxury lifestyle brands. So going into cannabis with a certain perspective and expectations, it was a really steep learning curve. But I was lucky enough to start my cannabis journey at Papa Barkley, where there is deep storytelling. There's a very heartfelt origin story between the founder and his father, and that led to the name Papa, and then Barkley is his dog. So I think, with cannabis brands and businesses, when you have a true origin story that you feel ignites you, and you can tell over and over again, and each time it doesn't feel like you're just telling a story, you're actually connecting with a potential consumer or a potential customer. All of your brand ambassadors and everyone across the entire company is able to take that origin story and be able to relate to it in a way that's very, very personal. And I think that's where cannabis is a very personal industry. We see a lot of purpose-driven brands. We see a lot of purpose-driven founders. Now it's up to us as marketing professionals to be able to tell that story, amplify it, and look for those touch points along that path to purchase in terms of making it real and making it relatable and helping it resonate.
For sure. So, walk us through that customer journey, I suppose. What are some of those, this industry and these operators are so handcuffed in their ability to reach consumers and tell that story. What are some of the best brands that you see doing to communicate that message?
I think it's different. I mean, when you look at brands and different categories, right? It ties you to more like a regional type of experience rather than like a national type of experience, right? Where from a marketing standpoint, along that path to purchase, I've been known on all of my whiteboards to have these giant snake, path to purchase type of charts where we're looking at, okay, where's that first interaction? Is that at a demo? Is that at an event? Is that through word of mouth or through influencer? And then you're looking at, okay, how does that path to purchase from the awareness, consideration, conversion, and loyalty phases come through, and how that path to purchase intersects with an overall full funnel type of marketing, and then overlay that with something that with a mindset of being channel agnostic. So when we're looking at being channel agnostic, we want to think about, we don't care what you want, where you want it, and where to buy it. We'll find the most seamless and frictionless way of delivering it to you. And so that relies on the tech and the understanding so that your path to purchase, capturing first party data is really critical. I think a lot of brands don't do that very well. Email still is the most powerful way of connecting with your base. And I think we learn a lot of these lessons from e-commerce type driven companies that are not necessarily cannabis first. But if you look at digital brands or e-commerce brands and how they're capturing first party data, how they're driving consumers through along the entire path to purchase and repurchase and building the right stories at the right time, emails, social, events, PR. I think PR is really important. I guess how AI is valuing a lot of press presence versus, a lot of these paid presence, and how that's really prioritizing how you're getting proper ranking. So I think, again, not just within the cannabis industry, but just for marketers as a whole, we're having to flip the script in terms of how we're deploying our resources. And as you know, in cannabis, we don't have a lot of resources as marketers. So it's trying to kind of intersect those points of when we know somebody's considering the purchase and influence it as much as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I think that old adage that constraints breed innovation is something that's exciting to see in cannabis, where I feel like people are approaching it from a lot of different angles. As mundane as when you're driving down the highway in Colorado, every single stretch of highway is adopted by a cannabis dispensary because they're not allowed to put up billboards, but they are allowed to adopt a highway. So they can pay for the cleanup of the highway to have that advertising presence to all these consumers. It's a really interesting way that folks have tried to get in front of their customer. And I'm curious, is there any really creative or interesting way that a brand you've worked with has put a campaign out there or tried to meet the customer where they're at that you're particularly proud of having participated in, or something that you thought was really cool when you saw it out there in the wild?
Yeah, I'm going to take you back to 2019, which seems like decades ago. But my favorite example of Papa Barkley of meeting the customers where they are, or actually creating customers where they are, is a campaign number of my team members and I worked on back then, which we call the Desert Activation, which is in California. So we're looking at captive audience. Papa Barkley has three main segments. You've got what I call the active aging segment. So those are our older consumers who are looking to stay more active, more mobile, more engaged, and they have certain ailments, especially with localized pain and mobility. And then you've got your health conscious hustler. She is your Erewhon shopper, right? And then you've got the more male target, who are more health hackers. So we have three different segments, but for Desert Activation, it was specifically looking at the seasonality of Palm Springs and Palm Desert, where we have a captive audience of these active aging consumers who are in assisted living facilities or these more localized residential type setups. So where we would go in with a Cannabis 101 programming into these assisted living facilities, give them an hour and a half of what is cannabis, everything, the full drill of what is the plant, what are cannabinoids, what is the entourage effect. And at these assisted living facilities, residents can sign up to go to a dispensary visit the following week. So you have like 6 days to sign up for these dispensary visits, we, from the brand standpoint, already lined up the buses. So we worked with MJ Tours at that time on these buses, and it was like $35 a person that we paid for as a brand. So we paid for the programming, we designed the program, and we have had to line up with a dispensary ahead of time to make sure there's enough inventory for these consumers to go into. An average unit cost of a Papa Barkley product is probably about $80. So if you're thinking about that basket size, just one item is going to be, significantly above a walk-in traffic for a basket in California. So we already knew that there was a preference and an opportunity to build baskets and bring an entire cohort to a store. At the height of the desert activation, we actually bused 100 seniors to a dispensary in Palm Desert. So there was actually 3 bus loads of engaged, educated consumers who were already predisposed to buying Papa Barkley. So with the velocity of that, if we look at from a 360 standpoint, we were able to have billboards all along the freeway in Palm Springs. So, because, what we want to do is how do we impact on awareness? So a lot of these billboards looked like billboards that you would see for Hims and Hers or Honest Company. So they looked established CPG to be able to build that credibility. So we did have billboards, we had bus shelters, we had articles in USA Today and local newspapers, so that you're starting to kind of get the knock-on effect of outdoor, out of home, print, and then there were PR articles that we inserted into packets for seniors so they can see it's legit. It's been in Forbes, it's been in USA Today. Real legitimate editorial features have happened. Then there's the layering on of programmatic, where we do have programmatic ads that are popping up. We're also buying search as well. So at that time, we were just layering on iHeart Jane. And I think back then, Jane had maybe less than 10% penetration of dispensaries and brands. So it was definitely early days. So if you look at sort of like a 360 standpoint, out of home, PR, news, so print, and then also programmatic plus search, then you're creating a very saturated crucible of where if anybody's going to see it, understand it, you're going to get it at all those touch points along that path of purchase. Plus you're hand holding an engaged and an educated audience into the store. At some of the subsequent tour visits, our brand ambassadors were actually already putting in the orders before consumers got to the dispensary. So the conversion was actually pretty fast. And the average basket at that time was probably close to $160.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that. And I have to imagine that type of not only 360 marketing towards the customer, but also very collaborative effort with the dispensary where you're essentially providing them with a stream of high intent, high quality, high purchase opportunity customers right to their door. And I feel like that's one of the few real examples that I've ever heard of what everyone talks about in the industry, which is bringing in new customers. There are so many of these cannabis bros who will make a 510 thread vape and paint it pink and say, well, this is for soccer moms. So we're going to get the soccer moms into the industry now. And that's how we're going to build our big customer base. And they just don't understand that not only is that vastly misunderstanding the needs of a particular customer base, but it's also not giving those folks an opportunity to come into the industry. It's not giving them that really easy handheld experience. And like you're saying with this activation, literally meeting them where they're at. So that's really cool. That sounds like an incredible
and actually
move.
creating and increasing our TAM, right? So these are people who were not engaged, who had a specific physical need for plant-based remedies. And we were able to educate them, get them excited, walk them through the whole journey, handheld them, and brought them to a customer's door.
Totally. Yeah, I hear that kind of strategy as it relates to branding and messaging. And you kind of touched on the 3 segments that Papa Barkley served and now this kind of golden year population. How did you guys think about not alienating one while you invested in the other? Were there guardrails that set up, around the brand architecture or the messaging or the products themselves that kind of invest in one of those segments while maintaining the integrity of the messaging that you want to preserve for the biohacking bro, which is so different from, Gertrude's arthritis needs?
Well, part of it is through the content strategy as well. And that starts from content creation. When we were rebranding and looking at much more lifestyle oriented type marketing, again, taking a page from Hims and Hers, very lifestyle driven type imagery. We had a diverse range of models who we shot. Uh, and, with our active aging consumers and with our model, I didn't even retouch, things like wrinkles and creases. And, we wanted real looking people in a very lifestyle type imagery. So we represented the audience who we're serving. And I think that's important because with content, you need to see yourself in that situation. You need to be able to relate to it. And the best way to relate to it is to represent.
Totally. So maybe to pivot a little bit, we've talked a lot about getting the product into the customer's hands once it's already built. But, from your experience being in the room when these businesses are planning their products and trying to create that full cycle experience from innovation to getting it into the customer's hands, how do really great companies think about innovation in their products in cannabis? And what, takeaways do you have from being there in some of the most innovative companies and how they're really creating the next great product and how they're then making it land? Because it doesn't really matter if you've made something super cool. If that tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, doesn't get bought. So curious, how you see that full cycle experience.
Well, I'm really lucky that when I was at CannaCraft and when I was at StateHouse, I was leading innovation as well as marketing. I do believe that marketers have a particular advantage looking at innovation within the cannabis industry because we see the activities, we see the trends, we see what's going on at the store level. I go to at least half a dozen stores every week just to audit stores to look at what's going on. And I, would talk to budtenders. So within that innovation mindset, as we're looking at new product development, I think it overlays several things, right? It's looking at what's happening within the landscape, where are the opportunities and existing velocity with growth at different segments, whether it is a couple of years ago when all-in-one devices were such a small part of the vape category, but then is now a good chunk of it. So I think in California, it's now 30-40%. And in New York, I think it's like 60% of the market. But when I was looking at it back at StateHouse, it was still really, really small. And I was looking at across the entire portfolio of a company. So again, it's getting context, right? So what's going on within the industry? What do we have within our company's portfolio of products across different segments? What's the margin you're getting for each segment and where we're underrepresented? So what I recognized when I was at StateHouse was that we have so many pre-rolls, but our vape category was not like mirroring the value or the proportion of vapes within the California market. So I went in, put together a report and recommendation and spoke to leadership about creating a better or newer generation AI all-in-one device for Dime Bag. Dime Bag out of StateHouse's portfolio is the value brand. It's also a time, where you got price compression, the basket sizes and value have been coming down. So building a value brand at that time was really important. Dime Bag has always been known as being high volume, high value. So coming in with an all-in-one device specifically for Dime Bag was great because it's gone on to make millions of dollars for StateHouse, which I'm really happy about. So we identified that we needed to have a better offering within all-in-one devices. I worked with production and with procurement to create that launch, and then worked with our creative team to start designing for it and also looking for the right devices. Now, the part that I think would interest you guys most is because StateHouse has at that time 14 dispensaries from the Bay Area all the way down to the border, right? So we were able to launch and actually affect certain behavior and watch certain behavior in our stores first before our wholesale sales team needed to tweak it and take that program outside of our 14 stores. So within our 14 stores, full on product knowledge, all the bud tenders were educated in samples weeks before launch. Launching it at a critical time between Memorial Day weekend and the early months of June was great because we were able to see what was happening at the store level because we owned all that data. We could see which were the bud tenders who were able to sell more of it. And of the 6 strains, we knew which were the top 2 strains that we could never be out of stock with because they were just flying out of the store. And it hit really well at that sort of price point where you can be out of the door $30 for a full gram AIO. So there are a lot of things that, from an innovation standpoint, understanding what's in the market, understanding your portfolio, putting in the work at the dispensary level, and making sure that it was priced right to be able to drive that value velocity.
Super cool. Such a powerful advantage to have that vertical integration. I'd love to talk a little bit about some of, your background at Halston and in fashion and wellness and some of the projects and the businesses that you worked with before entering cannabis, and I guess shocked you coming into the cannabis industry that was just so common practice and being done in your previous roles that no one was thinking about or investing in cannabis. And I think that probably gave you an edge having that perspective and coming in and again, back to that kind of day one initiative. What were some of those things that you're like, we got to get smarter about this?
Thinking about initiatives and campaigns from a breadth and depth standpoint. So, coming in with more experience of things that I would think is just second nature when you're thinking about, okay, who are you designing for? What's going to be differentiated? How do you write that message? And how do you find velocity in a very, very short period of time by looking at all of the technology and different channels that you can put in right away? Back in 2019, I'm just going to call them listing platforms were very important. So we won't name any names. Listing platforms are really important. But then I think from a brand standpoint, directories or listing platforms are not as important, and you shouldn't be spending $6, $7, $8,000 a month just to have a preferred placement on that, because the success of that spend is going to be dependent on eyeballs and what's driving the traffic to that. So I think understanding attribution, understanding tweaking channels, understanding how to calibrate for a synchronized launch were really critical. And a lot of this stuff I was just taught from day one working in global agencies. And when we think about in fashion, how do you incentivize somebody to buy a $1,200 dress, right? So you got to think about occasion dressing. You got to think about, is it for a wedding? Is it for a special occasion? Do you want a wardrobe that's from what we call desk to dinner? So again, that daytime wardrobe that you're wearing to work, can you, tweak it, accessorize it so that it can take you all the way to dinner at the end of the day? So that's thinking about occasion usage. From a cannabis standpoint, we're really only just starting to think about occasion usage, and therefore marketers being much more dialed in on how to spend, when to spend along occasions and effects, and not to kind of like think about it as a, set it and forget it type of standpoint.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that cannabis is in maybe that middle step of that process where they are starting to build in effect-based marketing or branding for their products and starting to be a little bit more consumer friendly in terms of saying, look, this is what we hope this will provide to you from an experiential perspective. But I really like the idea of pushing it even one step further into actual occasion engagement. If you think about the summer when White Claw exploded, it was, I feel, because White Claw did a really incredible job of making it very clear when should you consume White Claws. All of their product imagery was people out at the beach, people on a boat, people at a day party, in college. It was very clear when and where. So then if you're on your way to that day party, you stop in the liquor store and you think, oh, I'll just grab these White Claws. They're right at this little end cap here where everyone has surfboards and looks cool and is outside. So it very much obviated the need for you as a consumer to decide where and when should I use this? You can just picture yourself already. And I think that a lot of cannabis products today are still a little bit trying to be everything for everyone, and
Mhm.
they're not necessarily getting super niched down into exactly what they want their product to be about. So yeah, I'm very excited to see when we start to progress as an industry kind of into that phase, because I think that's when it will really break through into the more consumer centric mindset.
For sure. I mean, we're seeing a lot more of that in beverage advertising, in cannabis beverage
Mm.
advertising. They're actually creating context for the drinking occasions, for the social occasions, and creating effects-based products that meet different types of occasions, right? So understanding consumption occasions demonstrates that you understand your audience as well, because when you hear about people who are going to Soul Cycle and taking, 3 hits of their vape before going in and just, like, killing it in that riding session, then you think about, "Oh, that's so cool," I mean, that person is not necessarily looking for a dog walk or a pre-roll before they go in there. Maybe that person's taking a gummy, before their Pilates, whatever the workout is. You're looking at, okay, how does fitness and different social occasions? Is it a creative type of endeavor where you're going to be on your own? I think there was a new frontier report that came out a couple of years ago that actually put in a little bit of a sad state for cannabis consumption, where I think the majority of cannabis is still consumed on your own.
Mm.
So it's kind of
Mm.
lonely. So how do we break that up? Because I think when we think about, a joint or a pre-roll that's passed around, it's a very social occasion. But in reality, a lot of cannabis is actually, consumed on your own. So we do need to kind of be more imaginative in terms of creating occasions, in terms of giving people the context. And that's a lot of what marketing does. We're looking at one, showing as the way of selling, and then two, understanding that we can meet them where they are along their day. So your THCV vape or your THCV gummy can help you focus and narrow your scope so that you're productive and you're actually taking a functional cannabinoid versus giving you the energy and or chilling at the end of the day. So I think right now we're really just getting into minor cannabinoids. Back in 2020 at CannaCraft, we were definitely looking at the use of minor cannabinoids and different formulation, but there was a lot of education that needed to be done. We had a very extensive program with Zoltrain back then, where all of our brands, all of our 5 core brands were already on Zoltrain, and our sales rep were able to take a single postcard to a dispensary and put stacks of it there so that the bud tenders, whether it's in the break room, can just scan and do all of the modules, and then of course they'll be incentivized afterwards when they've completed all of the modules. True
Mm.
believer in bud tender education. That's always foundational. I think if you've seen any of my posts on LinkedIn, almost all of them touch on bud tender education and how owning that point of conversion, that path to purchase, is critical. I love that in this industry, unlike any other industry, two things that are very unique about cannabis is that the brick and mortar is the final mile for cannabis. I don't think there's any other industry where the brick and mortar owns the final mile, because we've seen a lot of services and companies come and go. And what we've noticed is that success is with owning a brick and mortar that fulfills that final mile. So that's first thing. And then second, also unique to cannabis, is that a consumer can be 100% predisposed to buying a certain product and walk out with something completely different.
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah, I'll add another thing that I think is sort of a similar kind there and is unique to cannabis, which is that the retailer is in some ways also a hospitality environment. If you walk into a really great hotel in a new city you've never been to before, you can go up to the concierge and say, "Hey, what should I do around here?" And they'll say, "Okay, what do you like to do? Do you like restaurants? Then this is the spot for you. Do you like going
Mhm.
out and hanging around in the park and seeing the local culture? Here's what you should do. If you like history, here's what you should do." And I think that similarly, a lot of people walk into the dispensary, like you said, they might be predisposed to one thing or another, but in reality, what they want is a guide to what product will match to the experience that they're looking to have and where they're looking to consume and how they're looking to consume. So that really, I think, drives home the importance of that bud tender education, their ability to speak to the product and how it should ultimately impact that customer, kind of passing that all the way down the line. So then they can have that really high quality hospitality experience when they're actually purchasing the product and then, taking it out of the world using it.
Yeah, for sure. And then there are several influences of that, right? Because bud tenders have about an average turnover of 6 months. So as a
Mm.
brand, you need to go back in there and re-educate, sample on a regular basis. I recommend quarterly refreshes for bud tenders. It can be incentivized or it doesn't have to be incentivized, but I think that sampling and the education is really critical. Second, not every store is the same, right? So when Urban Leaf, we opened our Sunset Strip store in LA, it was right in the heart of hospitality. So you had Soho House at one end, and then you have Sunset Towers on the other. So, and in between are all of these hotels, amazing restaurants. The comedy club was almost right next door. So it's a high traffic, high tourist destination. So how you're actually managing your menu mix and your inventory is very different. You're going to want convenience items that you can grab and go. You're not going to want to be selling a lot of eights and, you know, and ounces, because that's just not going to fly. People are not bringing in all of their accessories. When we opened that dispensary, we invited all of like the general managers for the hotels. We had people from the comedy store. We brought in other business owners on Sunset Strip and also West Hollywood legislative leaders, so that it became a community type environment. So if you think about the store, the bud tender, the sampling, the education, the menu mix, the inventory, and what you're driving in terms of traffic, I think that's really important because you're not just looking at one thing. You're not just replicating one of your most successful stores and just dropping it into a place that's completely different in terms of its landscape makeup.
I love that. I love those partnerships. And, whether it's the comedy store or a Soul Cycle or a luxury hotel, it seems like that is such a great opportunity for the stores and the brands to initiate those occasions and to kind of forge those partnerships. I guess, do you have any kind of really practical recommendations to cannabis operators on how they can start to get out into their community and to approach some of these businesses that feel completely tangential to cannabis and make cannabis feel approachable and like it can align from a brand and value perspective?
Yeah, I think, approaches where you're looking from a community standpoint, understanding the community that you serve, that's just basic retail. Then the second aspect of it is if they can't find you, they can't shop you. So what are you doing digitally in order to be found and searchable? Are you ranking properly with your Google business profile? Are you doing all the right things to make sure you're getting, ranking authority within your location? Then on the, brick and mortar side at the community level, who are the people who are businesses that are around you that can help support growth and support new customer acquisition and new traffic? What are the ways in which you can support those local businesses in an authentic way that is not going to cost you, thousands and thousands of dollars? You can create co-partnerships where maybe there's a mutual opportunity where you go to the dispensary, but then you get X% off your first manicure next door or something, and vice versa. I think we've seen that kind of interesting collaboration between different store owners and dispensaries. So that's second. And then programming. What are you doing at the dispensary program wise that's driving traffic for your customers who are already going there and trying to get them to be more involved, whether it's education, whether it's consumption experience. So I think that there are a lot of ways that we have available to us, and it just comes down to, trying, testing and learning, making sure you continuing to capture that first party data and looking at what does true incentive look like.
Totally. Kind of reminds me of Airbnb has this new services initiative where they are, the whole new button in the Airbnb app, where folks on vacation who just booked their Airbnb can also add on a training session with a local trainer or a stylist to come by and do hair and makeup, or chefs or bartenders. And they're really kind of doubling down on this kind of ecosystem play where they're kind of building these service and hospitality provider kind of ecosystems where folks and businesses can partner to kind of surround consumers with everything they need at the push of a button. And it seems like there's a real opportunity there for cannabis to kind of insert itself in some of these other consumer places where people are already on vacation, or they're already going to the gym, and thinking of ways where cannabis can kind of augment and meet those consumers where they already are.
I've got a couple of quick questions that are kind of our cannabis real talk. So first one here, what is something that you believed early in your cannabis journey in the industry that you've now totally changed your mind about?
Oh boy. Oh, well, this might be kind of like a painful lesson. That is, if you demonstrate real performance, you're going to get support from your leadership. I think some of the
Absolutely.
best marketers in the industry have been able to show real performance, real velocity. They're building strong teams, they're utilizing funds in a way that's driving sales, but still at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that, one, you continue to get to keep your budget, and two, that in hard times, your team doesn't get pared down. Success and high performance does not equate to, I guess, stability.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, something we even experienced on the other side of that, as founders, is people sometimes struggle to communicate their high performance to us, even if they are performing in a great way relative to their role or relative to the industry. It also has to be sort of structured and communicated in the way that business leaders can ultimately digest and make decisions on. So that's a really great takeaway. Okay, next one up here on my list. What's a moment you hit the wall, you were so frustrated with some of the challenges that come up in cannabis, and you thought, hey, maybe this isn't worth it. Maybe I should just be doing something else. And what got you over that hump and moving forward?
Well, I launch a lot of products. So I drive a lot of go-to-market strategy. And there are a lot of things within go-to-market and launch that I have zero control over. So even though I've made it my business to understand every single step of supply chain and have synchronized and organized new product launches at a time where, retail customers have been educated, retail visual merchandising has been done, digital merchandising has been done, everything has been queued, PR, content, everything. And then we hear from ops that, oh, sorry, something went wrong within production, so now we're 3 weeks late. And you've put thousands of dollars on the line that you've queued up for this launch. Not only do you have to step back from how do I fix it, one, because all of that we can't afford to be wasteful within our industry, and especially with something that you can't control. And then how do you actually repair that customer relationship where the customer's already created the space for you digitally and physically and have talked you up within the store, and you have to walk back from that saying, so this unexpected thing happened, but I can't really tell you what it is because, we don't want egg on our face, but we want you to be really supportive as we kind of walk back a full month of launch, even though you've got on your feature cadence. I think that's probably something that happens a lot more within our industry than in any other ones, because, coming in from global CPG and global brands, we're planning 18 months ahead of start of ship. And you've got a year and a half to gear for something. But here within cannabis, we're talking about 16 weeks to get a product out there. So we're moving and hoping that the stars align every single time. And it's very challenging from a marketing standpoint because we're where the rubber meets the pavement. If it doesn't work, it's on us, and we're the ones who are real partners in supporting our sales team, and they get super frustrated too. So I would say within that context of managing uncontrollables, which happen a lot, and being able to rise above it and be able to mediate and calibrate moving forward. So that would be the most challenging one. What brings me back from that edge? I would say the people. This is probably the most engaged, passionate, ambitious, hardworking people I've ever worked in any industry. And I came from the global advertising industry, where it's incredibly competitive, it's very high velocity. And even then, with the camaraderie that I've built there, it's, nothing compared to the cannabis industry. So many of my friends are here. It's so purpose driven. We're mission driven. Most of the brands and companies that I've worked for. And we all recognize that there are easier ways to make money than to be in cannabis.
For sure. All right, last one here. So if you zoom out and imagine the cannabis industry 10 years from now,
Yeah.
how do you think the most successful brands will be showing up in people's lives? And not just how they sell, but how they're showing up in culture and building loyalty and trust. What's your prediction for what that next era of cannabis brand building is going to look like?
Well, my sort of stealth approach, and if you kind of like look at my shelf, all of the brands that I work on, they look like they belong on your kitchen counter or in your medicine cabinet. So I tend to create and work with brands in a way that allows them to be destigmatized and normalized just by fitting in. So I don't necessarily work on brands that are super hypey and have that sort of street look. I tend to create brands that look like you'd just be able to pick it up in a Target. To me, normalizing and destigmatizing has to do with where that product is found and where a consumer sees that product and brand fitting in, so that you never feel like you're taking it out of your bag and somebody's going to go, "Oh, you use drugs." So I try to
100%.
normalize it by the way it integrates into everyday lifestyle.
Well said.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Angela. It's been a great conversation. It's been a real masterclass on building trust and innovation in the space and staying high touch in such a brutal market and industry.
You got to find your
Sorry to go.
friends, the people who you call at 11, 12:30 at night, and get a reality test and somebody, people who can calm you down. And I think the community is here. Cannabis isn't going away. And find a collection of people who are really smart and smarter than you.
Absolutely. Well, Angela, I think you're one of those people for us. You are the rare operator who's done this across every type of cannabis business, vertically integrated, wellness first, CPG, tech, and you've brought your creativity and clarity to all of it. So anyone out there who's listening, if you're building a brand right now, rewind, take notes, find Angela on LinkedIn. She's always dropping truth bombs on there. Angela Pih, P-I-H, or find her at Point Brand. That's pntbrand.com. You will not regret it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Angela.
Thanks so much, Angela.
That's it for this episode of High Touch. If you liked this conversation, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend who's building something in cannabis.
We will see you next time. Stay high. Touch.